Well, thank you for inviting me to come talk today. This is going to be a little bit of a different kind of talk than we just heard. I won't be able to answer questions about the management of these analogs. I was more of a participant, so I'm going to be talking about my experience at HERA and HMP. I've got a lot of pictures, tell you about what we did during my missions. And I'll answer as many questions as I can about the analogs. I'm just not representing them. So I'm going to just an outline about me. I'm going to talk about kind of the two sides of the coin, the comparison of HERA and HMP. And then I'll go into HERA, a few slides on HMP, and then a little bit of looking back again about the comparison and the conclusion. So this funny picture here was me during the HERA mission where we were trying to simulate our own microgravity by jumping in the air and taking a picture of ourselves. So kind of a comical start. Just a note, so I am talking about my personal experience at these analogs. I don't represent them or the teams that manage them or select the crew members for them. And I'm only representing myself or some of my own interests, not the company that I work for. I have to make that disclaimer up front. So it's recorded. I said it. So there you go. So just one slide about me, just a background, because I'm happy to talk about other stuff offline. My background is in aerospace engineering and geophysics, currently a PhD student in space sciences studying habitats for the surface of Titan. My experience is in the human spaceflight world, so I've been in human spaceflight for 26 years, most of it at Johnson Space Center, either as a flight controller for ISS or a crew instructor. I also did life support systems development for Orion and advanced life support systems development for Mars. And currently, my focus is on surface habitation. So you'll find me on LinkedIn as Lunar Hab Guy because I focus on lunar habitat development, and you can find a lot more on LinkedIn. Other stuff, happy to talk about, and I've got some stickers for Explore Titan. So I founded Explore Titan Inc., which is an organization looking at human missions to Titan. Also have a few other companies. I do a lot of work in meteorites on the side, and I work in the space architecture community with AIAA and ASCE. And as far as analogs go, I'm going to talk about HERA and HMP, but I've also done high seas at OMA and MDRS, and happy to talk about those experiences as well. So you can kind of tell I'm an analog junkie at heart. It's getting harder and harder. There's a lot more wonderful analogs that have started in the past 5 years or so. I'd love to do more of them. It's getting harder and harder to break away, unfortunately. So, wow, this is huge. HERA and HMP, I kind of call it two sides of the coin, two ends of the spectrum, because they are very different analogs and what they focus on and what they do really well. I mean, they're both great analogs, just for different reasons. HERA, you are the test subject. You don't bring science to the HERA mission. You are the science. You're the guinea pig in there. They're doing science on you. There is a mission control that is supporting you during the entire mission that you're going to be talking to throughout the mission. You have strict timelines that you're executing to get all of that science done because they have stakeholders that are looking for those results. And even the habitat architecture, and I'll show some pictures, is a different architecture than for HERA than HMP. And they have, in terms of isolated, confined, extreme environments, different focuses there. You are certainly confined in HERA, isolated to a degree. You're shut inside of the habitat, but you're certainly not in an extreme environment. You're in a high bay building at Johnson Space Center. Whereas HMP is like on the other side of the spectrum. You're bringing your own science to HMP, so it's you're trying to obtain your own results. There's no mission control. There's not strict timelines. You're there to get your work done as you can, and different architecture to the habitat. And you are isolated. I'm going to talk about where HMP is if you're not familiar with it, but you are in the Canadian Arctic, and you're one of maybe 6 people on the entire island. So really different analogs. So first, I'm going to spend most of my time on HERA. Back in the background is part of our mission patch, just to so you know what you're looking at. So there's a lot more information out on the internet about the background for HERA. It's located at Johnson Space Center inside of Building 220. It's actually in the same building as the new CHAPIA Mars analog. They're both in that same high bay. It used to be the desert rats habitat. If you look up desert rats, part of this habitat was out in the desert, and they brought it back in the high bay, cleaned it up, added another level to it, and now it became HERA. They've been running missions now for 12 years. You can still go out there and volunteer. I think missions are 45 days and 90 days, so they're really doing some great stuff there. They're focusing on the physiological, psychological effects of isolation. So being shut in there, simulating missions, deep space missions. So you really are the guinea pig in that environment. So they're looking at crew dynamics. They put some stressors on you. They wake you up in the middle of the night for events. They do some various crew dynamics to see what the interaction is between the crew members. So it's really interesting to put yourself in that role. There are some habitat systems, but not a whole lot. I know they've been working to improve that so they give more and more of a higher fidelity habitat feel. But at least during my mission, there wasn't much to do with the systems of the habitat. So a little bit of a background on HERA. So this is it. You have on the right end, the hygiene module is really the bathroom. It's a gigantic walk-in bathroom. One of the lowest fidelity things I think about the entire habitat, because you're not going to have that luxurious big bathroom with a shower. Then in the middle, you've got a 2.5-story habitat, and I'll go into what's on each level here in a moment. And then the far left is your airlock, and that's the ramp coming down out of the airlock. Unfortunately, you don't do EVAs. That's not a focus of the habitat because you're just going to walk right onto the high bay. Mission control is going to be right there in front of you. They're just outside the habitat. So this is kind of a cross section. So there's the airlock on the left that I mentioned with its porch. This is the lower level of the center section, the 2.5-story section. So you have a works. I didn't name all of the acronyms, I apologize, but on the upper left is a medical facility, and then you have a simulator system, and I'll show another picture of that in a moment, and Common Control Center, and then GMWS is a multi-purpose maintenance workstation. So it has a fold-down table that you can use for activities or for maintenance. And then on the far right is the big bathroom, hygiene module. So this is in the upper level. On the left, you see the middle floor is where your galley table is, starting with the upper left, so you can seat 4 people around the galley table. And then you have the galley system where you rehydrate your meals. On the bottom right corner, you see outline of an exercise bike, so it's really the exercise workstation, and then a comm station over on the bottom left. From there, you can climb up ladders. You can see that on the far right. There's ladders that take you up to the crew quarters. There's 4 crew quarters around the top. I call it a 2.5-story because you can't stand in the crew quarters. You kind of crawl in. You can sit up in them. It's like being in a tent, but it's not a full story level. But each person does get their own crew quarters, so you have privacy. Like they have changed that up some. They can take down some walls of the crew quarters and make it more open, so you have less privacy, and they can do experiments with that. So mission training. So this was one of the great things about HERA. Over the course of a couple weeks before the mission, you're doing about 25 hours of training. You're getting to know the habitat, all the systems inside the habitat. You're getting to know the experiments that you're going to do, how the timeline is going to work. So that's was a great benefit for being prepared for your mission. It's a little bit of a taste of what astronauts go through for preparing for a mission. You get to go through emergency egress. So emergency egress, that's one of the things about this habitat. You just walk out the door at any moment. You can just walk out the door. If there's a situation inside that you feel is dangerous, you open the door and you're done, right? So that's psychologically, I think that is a part of a detriment to this analog, is that you're just on the other side of the door from walking out. So we got to know all of our experiments. So we got to talk to the PIs before starting. So we got to ask a lot of questions about the experiments we were going to do. So we really felt prepared for the mission once it finally started. And I call it a microcosm of ISS training. ISS astronauts go through multiple years of this, but it's a lot of the same elements. So they're getting to understand the science they're going to do, understand the space station that they're going to be in. So we were well prepared for the start of the mission. So my mission had 4 crew members. What was interesting was that the roles were all randomly selected. So your commander was randomly selected from the 4 of you, and then the rest were a mission specialist. So it's an interesting way of doing it. The commander that I had for my mission was actually athletic department manager. At Johnson Space Center, there's a facility there where you can play sports and basketball and join teams. He was the manager of that facility, so an athletic director. No technical background, nothing in engineering, nothing to do with space. Other than that, he worked at the Space Center, but he did an amazing job. He was a people manager, and he managed the crew. So it was a good choice in the end. So we simulated a mission to an asteroid, and it was Geographos, or just Graphos. So it was a long mission, and I'll show you in a moment. Oh, there's 3 parts of it. So we first started with immediately after transit to the asteroid. So we're still, short comm delay with MCC, and then we skipped ahead to being at the asteroid. And we had a 20-minute comm delay, so we did some experiments around that. And then part 3 was on the return trip without comm delay. So different phases of the mission. And so we got to do some things that were preparing us for being at our destination. We were using the simulation facility to simulate the activities we were going to do at the asteroid. And then we got there, we did them for real, and then simulated the return mission. This is a snapshot of the timeline system. OSTPV, onboard short-term plan viewer, is something to use for space station. So we were able to use that. I think that's one of the benefits of HERA. They can grab stuff from space station operations, borrow it, and use it for the HERA missions. So you have flight controllers that are flight controllers for space station. You have tools that they use for space station operations. They can take those and use them for the HERA missions. So we lived and died by this plan, just like the ISS crew members do. Every half an hour, you're moving on to the next thing. Your sleep is planned, your breakfast, all the meals, all the activities are planned on the timeline. So it's very ISS-like in the way they manage these missions. We had, I remember we had some public relations events really late at night to meet with different people on Earth. That was part of the stressors. We had to get up at 2 in the morning and put on a smile and do a press briefing with the ground. I think that was all part of the sleep deprivation study, though. So yeah, they were playing with us. They would get us up at 2 in the morning, and then we'd be all ready to go, and then there's a delay, and then there's another delay, and another delay. So it's 4 in the morning before we're doing the press briefing, just to put us under a stress, right? So this is our crew up on the top level. It's interesting, there's I'll show another picture in a moment. There's a tunnel going down through the middle of the center section. So 2.5 stories and a ladder going down the middle, but that ladder also has an elevator to it. So you can see the controls there so that you can take equipment and put them on a platform and put them up the elevator to the upper story. It's something you don't always think about. You don't need it in microgravity, but since this was a simulation with a habitat that has gravity, trying to carry containers up the ladder was dangerous. So there's an elevator there as well. And we're all holding drink bags. So one of the cool things about HERA is we also were using leftover food from the ISS program. So it was all the same space food that the ISS astronauts eat and drink. It's stuff that didn't go up for one reason or another, didn't have long enough shelf life. So it gets kind of donated to the HERA program, and that's what we eat. This is a group activity in the mid-level. That's the fold-down multi-purpose maintenance workstation. So they had us do either group activities, solo activities throughout the whole day. So this is one where we're working together. Lots of room down that level. That's one thing. You're not in a real tight space like you might be in an Orion or in a more, what I call it, realistic spacecraft where space is at a premium. Because we had plenty of elbow room here. This is one of my crew members doing a simulation of flying around the asteroid. So that we were preparing for the mission where we're going to be taking a vehicle around close to the surface, picking up samples off the asteroid. So we had to practice this repeatedly on the way out there, just like a normal mission you could imagine would do. I was not good at it. I kept crashing the thing. It was really tricky. It was definitely hard. I'm not a trained pilot, but we still had to do it over and over again. So you kept dying over and over again. This is in the galley, this is the food preparation center. So we had to rehydrate all of our meals. So this little system there on the table that I'm rehydrating some drinks with a needle that injects inside of the pouch. And then you have to dispense the right amount of fluid into it. And that's what we did for all of our drinks, all of our meals. It's really interesting to learn about the astronaut food. One thing I learned during this mission is that apparently your taste buds perform differently when you're in microgravity. They're not as sensitive, so they have to overspice the foods for the astronauts, which is great for them, but for us, everything was way, too spicy for us. But that's what we ate anyway. This is us at the galley table, that middle picture, so it's the upper left, the 4-person table against the wall. We had some TV screens there. It's a little bit of a awkward fit around there, the way it's shaped. I think it needed to be a little bigger. We also used it as kind of a workstation area. You can see laptops there too. So we're using like a home base where we had laptops, but we're also eating there. It didn't really function very well as a multi-purpose station for that use, because you can see it's very crowded on there, and then just one of those water bottles falling over all over our laptops would have been bad. But that's what we had. And you can see me on the right there with some of the meals that we had. This is the crew quarters. So you crawl in. It's like you're in a padded cell because the walls are all soft and insulated. It's enough room for a sleeping bag on the right, a little bit of space to the left. You could sit up in there. You couldn't stand up. I thought it was plenty of room. It was very comfortable. It was quiet. But I know in other missions on the left, they took down that wall, and then you're open to all the the larger living space inside of the habitat. This is that tunnel in the middle, so I'm going up the ladder between the levels, and this is what also serves as an elevator. I think the only thing to be careful about was in the middle of the night, the bathroom was you had to get to the bathroom from the first level. Crew quarters are 1.5 stories up, so you have to come down the ladder, and coming down in sock feet, you had to, be careful you didn't slip on the rungs. So my takeaways from this Analogue, it's very well organized. They're well supported. They're well funded. So you have a crew in the MCC at all times. You get training to prepare you for the mission. And we had lots to do. We had full, very tiring days of activities, timeline throughout the entire day. There was really very little downtime at all. Even after meals, we had surveys to do after meals, so we were packed. It's a well-designed habitat. I really enjoyed it. I could stay in there for a year if they wanted to lock me up there for a year. As far as realistic representation of a surface habitat, obviously the bathroom isn't realistic. It's a giant walk-in bathroom, lots of space. But and you didn't have systems to work with. The crew normally has to do a lot of maintenance on systems. You hear about that a lot. They're spending a lot of time maintaining ECLS. They're managing the thermal control system. We just didn't have any of that, so it's not quite accurate. But all in all, it was a great experience. We got along really well for being randomly selected, randomly put together, and then executing the mission within 2 weeks. So great Analogue from that perspective. So yeah, if you're looking to get as close to a NASA-style mission, the realistic ISS-like mission, this is a great Analogue to get involved in. You can apply to be a crew member. I think they're always accepting applications for 45 and 90-day missions. It's very safe. It's a NASA-run facility, so they have hazard mitigation controls everywhere. So you definitely feel safe inside the habitat. And you've got real ISS flight controllers that are supporting you, so they know what they're doing. I think and you don't need to bring your own research. That can often be a challenge. You want to do an Analogue, but you're asked, well, what science are you going to do? And that's where you I don't know what I would do. This one, you don't have to worry about bringing your own science. You are the science. And to me, that's even more NASA-like. Astronauts are not bringing their own research to the space station. They're doing research for everybody else. So that's HERA in a nutshell. And I'm going to flip it around and look at one completely different. We're going to hear about FMARS tomorrow. So it's on the same island, but I'm going to talk about a different habitat that's on Devon Island called the Houghton Mars Project Research Station, or just HMP. So HMP has been going for like 28 years. Pascal Lee manages this facility. He's been doing it for a very long time. He has a process very well figured out for preparing for a mission and executing it. He operates it under the umbrella of the Mars Institute, and in partnership with SETI, which is interesting, search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But I think it's just the kind of a business arrangement that he has with SETI. But they're funded by NASA every year. So you find information about HMP on the NASA websites because they are definitely involved. It's located in an incredible place called Devon Island in the Canadian Arctic. So that's that kind of grainy picture there on the left, or I'm sorry, on your right, where it's the largest uninhabited island on the planet. And when you're there as that crew, your crew is the only people on that entire island. It's situated on the edge of Houghton crater. It's a crater a few 100 million years old. And so you're going to do missions down inside the crater, which was really cool. And you can find ejecta from the crater lying around everywhere you go because there's next to no vegetation there. So the rocks are everywhere. You can find chunks of granite that were taken out of the bedrock and thrown everywhere around the crater. And it's interesting. So you can find articles about HMP out there. There's been conspiracy theorists that NASA's not actually sending rovers to Mars. They're putting them on Devon Island and taking video. That's how good of an Analogue it is. So I grabbed some of these articles that were out there on the internet, these conspiracy theorists, to say that we're really all on Devon Island and not on Mars, which I think really just speaks to the fact that it's a really good Analogue. So the design of HMP, very different from the HERA mission. So this is a hub and spoke architecture. You can see on the left, you have a core module. It's kind of a wood frame structure that they hauled in all of the wood and they built there on site. And then you have these tents. They're metal frame tents that are situated radially out from the hub. And each one of those tents has a specific function. On the right there is, on this picture here, these were working tents, like offices, workspaces, and going around from there were crew quarter tents, and then on the upper left is kind of a garage space. It was all tools, working on generators that might have failed, working on ATVs that might have failed. On the bottom left, you see that big platform. That was the galley tent, and Now it's just a platform because during over one of the winters, everything was covered in snow, and a polar bear had inadvertently climbed up on top of the galley tent because he just climbed up the snowdrift, and then he fell in through the tent roof into the galley tent and just destroyed the whole thing. And so they had to tear it down, and all that's left is the platform. So a little bit of a story there of what happens here. This is really in the Canadian Arctic. The whole thing gets covered in snow during the winter. The upper right picture is one I took. You see the metal frame tent structures. The temperature here is almost always, when they go in August, about 32 degrees. It only shifts a couple of degrees back and forth. The sun never sets. It's always sunlight, and the temperature is always about 32 degrees. So my mission was in two parts. We spent the first part kind of doing base camping out from the habitats. So we go excursions with the ATVs out to locations, some pretty cool spots that they wanted to show us inside the crater and around the crater. I spent my time when we weren't out on the ATVs evaluating the habitat design, looking at the flow of traffic between the modules. You can almost imagine how that center hub is used as a home base. Everybody keeps going back to that. So I was looking at traffic flow between that center hub and all the radial modules that were coming away from it, thinking about how that architecture could be improved. The second week, we were emulating an excursion across the island. So we had a route planned to go from Houghton Crater, that's at the top of the island, down to the southern edge of the island. And we were using a Humvee vehicle you see in the middle picture there, stuck out in the middle of nowhere, as our pressurized rover. So we had some challenges. On the bottom right is the ruts of mud that we got stuck into. So one of the unfortunate things about Devon Island is that the global warming is causing the permafrost to melt, so the ground is getting soft. Years ago, when Pascal started these missions 20 years ago, it was dry and dusty up there. It was cold and dry and dusty, and even more Mars-like than it is now. Now the ground is getting soft. We had a lot of problems with mud and just getting stuck in the mud. And you couldn't tell it was soft. You could drive an ATV over it, you could walk on it, that's fine, but then as soon as you try to drive the Humvee, you sink. And so that was a real challenge for us. So here's some pictures. I just want to give you an example. These are pictures of Mars. Right, let's grab these off of JPL websites, and then you can see how the terrain, the color of the rocks, the barren regions of it, and then pictures of Devon Island, and you kind of go back and forth. Besides little patches of snow that showed up while we were there, it's very Mars-like. There's nothing there. There's hardly. I think I counted over 2 weeks. There were 3 or 4 birds that happened to fly by, but other than that, there's nothing. I think there's some small critters. That like rodent-sized critters that are there, but we didn't see any. So inside Houghton Crater, so this I think it was an asteroid or comet that created this crater. It threw up a lot of subsurface rock, and even though on the surface of Devon Island you see a lot of brown rock, down underneath more bedrock is gray. And so you go down inside the crater and suddenly you're in an environment that looks like the moon. So just like before, these are pictures of Apollo. And then now this is inside Houghton Crater. Upper right corner is the picture that I took, and then I removed the blue background, put black, and suddenly it looks like you're on the moon. So it's a really good analog for the moon as well. So takeaways from HMP. So the goal of HMP is really going EVA. It's not the habitat itself. It's really going outside the habitat. It's field analogs. It's doing experiments out in the field, which is awesome. It's just a different focus than HERA. You're definitely isolated. If things go wrong on Devon Island, you have to call in a plane to come pick you up. You can't just walk out the door. Safety, mission control isn't on the other side of the door. you are really hundreds of miles away from anything else. But the terrain is just amazing. This place on the right, and I've got it shown again, is Astronaut Canyon. So we're standing on the lip of a canyon. It just looks just like Mars. If you remove the water down the bottom, it looks just like Mars. We had some challenges with overland excursions because of the softening ground, unfortunately. But other than that, I know yearly they do EVA testing there. There's lots of incredible testing out in the field on Devon Island. I would love to see the habitat get increased in fidelity. Obviously, you got to go outside of the central hub to go to the other modules, so that's unfortunate. You're not confined in there. There could be a lot more that could be done at HMP, but I don't think they see that as a priority because they're doing enough with all the science out in the field. So, yeah, HMP, if you're looking to be isolated, extreme environment, HMP is perfect. If you're looking to get out, do EVAs in the barren terrain, it's a great location to do that. If you're looking to do geological experiments, it's a great place to be. But if you're interested in doing studies in confined habitats, that's not the focus of HMP. You're not going to really find that there. So really very different. Looking back, it's a great experience in both places. They just have different purposes, different uses, and they're great for different reasons. They're both are still in operation. You can still reach out to HERA and volunteer to be a crew member there. That's volunteer-based, or you can contact HMP, MarsInstitute.org, and propose some science to go to Devon Island. Personally, I would go back to both, and I've been trying to go back. Unfortunately, HERA, since they repeat the same science a lot of times from mission to mission, they don't want repeat subjects. So I've been blacklisted just because I went on one mission. I'm not able to go back, unfortunately. If I had known that was going to be the case, I would have waited and gone on a longer mission. 45 days would be great. HMP, I would definitely go back and do some field testing out there, maybe some emergency shelters for astronauts that might be away from their habitat on the moon, and they need to put like a pop-up tent kind of shelter. Would be kind of fun to do at HMP. More work with mobility vehicles. There's still a lot that can be done. A lot of the lunar exploration architecture is going to be mobile in the early years of Artemis. With the LTV, pressurized rover, all that stuff can be simulated on Devon Island. So yeah, conclusion, I think just restating, these are both awesome analogs just for different reasons. And if you don't have your own science and that's been an impediment to you doing analog missions, then HERA is something you can go do and still get involved. And I think the work we're doing here at CHASM is key to helping gather this kind of information. The different kinds of analogs, what are they good for, what's not their focus. I don't want to say what they're bad for, they're all really good, but what's not their focus, and pulling all that information together to help the community figure out, you want to do an analog, which is the right fit for you for what you want to do. So I want to thank again CHASM, Eleanor, for inviting me here, for Terry, Space for All. Thank you. So appreciate it. I think that's it. I take questions.
Thank you so much, Bill, for a wonderful presentation. And yes, just regarding the lights, because there were some amazing pictures that sadly we couldn't see so well. It's normal, it's for our sign language interpreters, but I know that we're going to see so much more pictures of the day you get on Mars, and we get the real thing even more. So thank you so much for sharing this and coming all the way for us. I really appreciate it. And there was a question?
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I had a couple of questions. Like the first question is both HERA and HMP, because it's a part of NASA analogs, do they require US citizenship to participate in these analog missions?
Good question. I believe HERA does. You can check the website where you can volunteer, and there's a form to fill out. I believe that's the case. I don't believe that's the case for HMP.
Okay, so HMP doesn't require US citizenship.
You should verify that on their website, but I don't believe they do.
Okay. Okay, so I have one more question. Like, this is also a bit of humor. If you look at the movie Martian, they lose one astronaut on Mars, and the commander, without realizing, they move back to Earth. And on the way, they were told by NASA that the other astronaut is alive, and they plan to go back. So if you're the commander, like, what would you decide at that time? Like, a high risk of losing one astronaut or low risk of losing 5 astronauts?
It's a good question. I think they made the right decision. I mean, ignoring the fact that the wind on Mars isn't going to be strong enough to blow over your spacecraft. But if you come up with another scenario for a reason why they had to live, I think they made the right decision. And I think that the solo crew member on the surface did an incredible job, figuring out his way, engineering his way out of that, sciencing his way out of that. I love the book much better than the movie, because what he goes through is much better than the movie. I was pretty upset when the movie was nominated for Best Comedy of the Year. That really ticked me off.
Okay, thank you.
But I agree with the path they took, yeah.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
I'm curious, you've done both NASA-run and non-NASA-run analogues, and I'm curious, particularly with HERA, since it's within JSC, is there any difference in the way it's run or the mindset behind the people running it versus, for example, MDRS? And is there something we can learn as amateur analogues from the way the space agencies run their missions?
I think I caught part of that. I wouldn't necessarily say they're amateur. I think it's the differences in how they're funded and supported. It's the unfortunate thing. Everyone tries to do the most they can with the limited amount of funding. Things like MDRS are just running on a shoestring budget. And so the NASA analog is much more well-funded and supported, and there's a much greater focus on safety in my mind. So, and because of this NASA facility, they have to be safe. They're held to high standards there, whereas other analogs, not so much. They're kind of just making up as they go along, or making up their own safety standards, which can be a little dangerous. And I think efforts to standardize analogs and to create some safety standards is a good thing, so that we improve them all. Because if there are injuries at analogs, that could spell a big problem for the whole community altogether, that we will all suffer from. If suddenly, say, OSHA or the government decides, wait a minute, we're going to impose our own standards on you, then that could hurt some of our operations. So I think that's mainly the difference in my mind. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I was also just curious about, for example, the way procedures are organized and run. Is there a different mindset that NASA uses for kind of the structure of the mission that is markedly different to MDRS, for example? Or are we learning from agencies?
Yeah, I think on that front, they're kind of working with the ISS paradigm, where you're on a strict timeline with interaction with mission control. Whereas in a lot of Mars missions, what we envision is that the crew is not going to be on a strict timeline. They're going to be more independent, might have a task list each day that they have to accomplish, but it's not going to be timelined out to the half an hour just to get the things done they need to get done. But at HERA, they were managing more like ISS, which is really a different way of doing it.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
Bill, at HMP, there are no Zoom requirements for
Sam's bringing it from that end, I think.
Sorry, hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Lex.
Go ahead, Lex.
Great to see you. Such a fun presentation. At HMP, there are no quote-unquote spacesuits, correct, for EVAs?
Right, yeah, you don't wear a spacesuit to go outside the habitat. They're only wearing spacesuits when they're testing spacesuits. Otherwise, you just come and go in normal clothes. So yeah, that's another factor, that it's not an enclosed environment. It's not a simulated mission from that perspective. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep.
So I know you didn't talk about some of the privately owned or the academic analogs that you've been on, but you've been on many analogs, so both private, both NASA funded, both academic. what would be your best piece of advice as an experienced analog explorer for private analogs and academic analogs to have the highest fidelity that they can have so it doesn't become a space camp experience?
Right, right. Yeah, I actually have some backup slides because some of this came from some of these slides came from a presentation I did on how to be a successful analog astronaut or analog explorer. And to me, it comes down to you get out of what you put into it. You need to put yourself in the right mindset that you are isolated, you're confined, you're in an extreme environment, that you're on a space mission. If you go into it thinking about home and want to look at your phone and do the email and think you're on a space camp, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a space camp feel. So it's really up to you, and you need to be diligent about that and maintain the simulation. Certainly the habitats can help with that. Things like MDRS, where you walk outside and you go to another module, but you're suddenly out in the beautiful sunshine and fresh air, wide open spaces, that hurts your ability to maintain simulation. So in my mind, the two work together, but it starts with you and your mindset and being diligent about staying within the simulation. Does that help? Yeah.
Hey Bill, I'm Florian, Austrian space firm. So like having experienced, I'd say, a rather procedure and procedure-rich environment, or like the missions we conduct are like rather structured by SOPs, by experiment information forms, by like flight and traverse plans and everything. So for you, having like now seen sort of the NASA way of doing things, like with their timelines and also several privately or non-profitly run analogs, what would be kind of the sweet spot for you between like doing it exactly by the books like NASA does and having like a completely sort of laissez-faire way of like, hey, let's have a walk and call it EVA type of EVA. So where do you reckon is like the exact sweet spot where you get like all the benefits of having proper flight planning, mission control, and so on, and still having a fair amount of fidelity that you can kind of take away from as a sort of individual isolated analog astronaut?
Yeah, I would love to see something like HMP, but ran like HERA. So you're in an extreme environment, and you're able to do EVAs, and you're strict, as Lex was pointing out, you're strict on wearing a spacesuit when you go outside. And I think we'll hear about FMARS, so it's kind of a step closer in that spectrum. But if you had an MCC with a strict timeline, then you're going to even feel more like an astronaut that's on a space mission. But not being able to go on EVAs from HERA was a detriment. Being in a high bay, every once in a while you could hear people. They would give tours of the building. And I remember one time we heard a kid yell outside. He got in trouble for that, but we heard a kid yell, and every once in a while we could hear some voices like, wait a minute, did you hear that? And there's some people talking on the other side of the wall. And so that was really unfortunate. So I need to move to more of the spectrum of that isolated extreme environment to get away from that and add the element of danger in there like you might have on Devon Island. Of course, they used to run the NEMO missions underwater. So NASA, would run those like a space mission. They don't have those anymore, but that was much better, on the better end of the spectrum in my mind.
Yeah, so like, yeah, we're on. Okay, so like looking at this like from the perspective of a like support crew member and photographer, like I of course see like the comparisons or like the differences between also like how these missions are kind of communicated and translated through images, and seeing like or having been part in missions that have like a 2.5 hour donning phase before you put on like this 50-60 kilogram simulators and then walk out, and are rather limited in sort of the stuff you can do because it's more or less realistic spacesuit that you're wearing, as opposed to having like complete freedom of motion or like ability to kind of just roam around and do explorative EVAs. So I can kind of see the 2 points, like doing it by the books and being limited in what you can do, and potentially also having to kind of put extra effort in, or like also maybe potentially being not able to finish an experiment as planned because they're just the inclination is too steep. You cannot just walk up there. It's just a no-go area, and so you do not go up there. Versus, yeah, we just run up there and collect some rocks. Period. So you see where I'm getting it. So that's like more where I would kind of want your statement on is like, where's the sweet spot? Where's like the do we assume to have like we have some fancy new technology that's going to be developed in 30 years from now? Potentially before we go to Mars, so let's assume for that in our spacesuit simulators, or do we say like let's take Apollo as a model, go by the books, and restrict ourselves? So what would you want to see? Like what would in which suit do you want to be in to get like most out of the experience?
Yeah, and I think you made a good point about Apollo too. It's the real spacecraft and real habitats we're going to have anywhere in the near term are going to be small, confined, cramped spaces. What we see in a lot of analogs, including HERA, is wide open, big spaces, which to me it's not realistic. We need to do more small, confined spaces for crew members to get that greater feel of a real mission. I think that's an improvement that could be made. And real timelines, like I said, going EVA, just getting ready to go on EVA could take hours or half a day or more. Whereas, in analogs today, you decide to go on EVA and you're out the door in 20 minutes or 10 minutes. Something really short isn't realistic either. So there's definitely a lot more work that we could do to move along that spectrum of realism that will help. I think it'll help improve the science and the return that we get from analogs as well when we do that. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make a slight comment. You mentioned before, obviously, NEMO missions. We'll be talking also about underwater habitats, including tomorrow. With the Biodyssus mission, it's one that's still in, preparation, but I think it's going to be something that's going to really go to that level of fidelity. And then I hope that hopefully it will, maybe show a standard of where we can go. And I don't know if anyone had a question over there.
Hi, thank you, Bill. An amazing presentation. I'm Ivona from the Moonshot Celebration. I have a personal question. What's next for you, if you can share? Would you also consider to go to outer space yourself?
I applied for the astronaut corps a number of times. I tried the angle of, I already know all the space station systems. I know how space station operates. Just send me up there. I'm good to go. You don't need to train me. But that's not what NASA looks for. Honestly, a lot of flight controllers try the same angle, but that's not the kind of people that they can train people about the systems, so they don't see that as value, unfortunately. For me, I'm at that phase now of just helping us get back to the moon and go on to the next step beyond Apollo. Not just to go back and land there and collect rocks and come back, but to go back and stay and live there for longer periods of time. So I'm at the point now of just trying to help other people get there and live there in any way I can, using the experience that I've had and helping the analog community, taking the other side of my experience and helping the analog community improve and do things so that we get the help from the analog community in that goal of going back to the moon and going on to Mars. So they need to all work together. That's what's next for me.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So, continuing from the previous question by the previous participant, so is it a bit easier to fly via private companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin, because you're also with Blue Origin right now? So, we have one of our ETH Zurich, where I did my PhD students. She is flying in a polar expedition program to space. In a SpaceX mission end of this year, and she's the first German woman to go to space. So that's my question. Is it easier to fly with Blue Origin or SpaceX, and are you also trying that?
I think it's two different opportunities, right? Blue Origin has suborbital flight opportunities, so those are easier to get on. They're less expensive than a space mission. If you're going to go on a SpaceX mission to stay in space for days, that obviously requires a lot more investment than a suborbital flight. So when Blue Origin, what other companies are doing suborbital flights, but I think you just need a smaller rocket, and you don't need all the training and all the systems training that you get for a space mission that you're going to be up there for days at a time. So I don't know what's easier. It's just one's less expensive. than the other. So that's easier.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. One more question.
Yeah.
I had with the same question that I asked to the previous speaker. What is your decision? Because you spoke a bit about NASA's is more safety. They maintain very high standards of safety. And the decision based on SUNY Williams and Bushmer, so was it motivated by the previous Columbia failure, or like, because the risk assessment was different by Boeing and different by NASA. So, so what would be your opinion on that? If it was the correct decision, and or is NASA is more conservative, or just they have better standards of safety?
As a former flight controller, I am curious about the decision process they went through. I think at the end of the day, they made the right decision. In my opinion, they made the right decision. When you're dealing with human life, you're going to be extra conservative. And if you have an option to reduce, potential harm to the crew, you take it. And that's the way you go. We don't take the risk like you did during Apollo days, and those were fighter pilots that were signed up to put their lives on the line. And it's a different mentality then than it is now. But yeah, if you've got another option to put the crew in less harm's way, then you take that option. So personally, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill, for a very interesting presentation. Playing a bit into the risk, you mentioned that on HERA you had high stress-inducing events, which were probably planned from either the PIs or the mission control. Could you talk a bit about the medical monitoring that went into having those events? Because usually when you have science like this, you need to weigh the benefits and the risks. And I've talking with different analog crews, lots of them want to include this type of events in their mission. But if you are on MDRS without a doctor or on crew and without medical monitoring, this becomes, I think, truly and for good reasons, an ethical issue.
Right, yeah. So we had periodic private medical conferences like they do from ISS. So I was able to speak to a doctor about what I was going through. They had multiple risk monitors, so things like heart rate, blood pressure they were taking. We also, we didn't do blood samples, other missions have at HERA. We did saliva samples. We had to take those regularly, put those in a drop box that magically returned to Earth. And there was a flight doctor, NASA Johnson Space Center flight doctor that supports ISS missions. We had one of those supporting our mission. So he was always on call, and who we talked to during our PMCs. So yeah, it was well monitored, so to capture all of that data, well controlled. And they did it for one thing, right? They went that extra level to capture that information because they had the capability there at JSC to do it.
Thank you. And a second question, going a bit to the point that you discussed about HERA and HMP having different approaches to mission control. Moving forward, we see, for a variety of reasons, that an objective is higher crew autonomy. And I wouldn't say lesser, but a different role for mission control.
Right.
Both for a variety of reasons, from career development for the participants to science generated by analog missions, could benefit differently. What kind of input would you have about missions trying to decide if they would go the MCC heavy or crew autonomy heavy mission types?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I kind of suspect NASA's going to be doing ISS-like operations, at least in early missions. The lunar missions, I think, will probably be like that. Mars missions will be on a spectrum. I think more and more crew autonomy is something they'll work towards, but you're talking about the next 20 years or more. it's probably going to be more on the spectrum of ISS-like missions, so that everything's well planned out, so that you get everything done. All right, because one of the challenges of missions where you bring your own science and you don't have a strict timeline, it's up to you to manage it. Is now all the risk is on the crew member to not get the work done, and so they paid, $3,000 to go do an analog, and they didn't get everything done because the weather was bad, or maybe they didn't plan well and they didn't prepare well, so they didn't have a good procedure and it didn't get done. Well, that's on them. For NASA, you're talking about billions of dollars. If things aren't well planned, it's billions of government dollars that are not spent well. So they're going to want to manage it tightly, and they're going to have a timeline to make sure that everything gets done. So I think if we're emulating what what spaceflight's going to be like for the next 20 years, then you've got to stay on that end of the spectrum too. Otherwise, you're giving an experience that when those students, for example, get into the real world, they're not going to find that. They're not going to find that kind of space mission being run. And so it might be a little leaning too far forward than what they're going to see in the next 10 years.
Other questions? Okay, then if there's no more questions. Oh, you have one. Okay, go ahead.
Go for it.
So a last thing, again from talking with other crews, there is an issue with energy expenditure within missions.
Mm-hmm.
So because you are not moving, you're not exercising enough, you usually are more accident prone because you're more jittery in some sense. You might want to do some extra activities just for, let's say, play or fun. And from that, some accidents might occur. How was that? HMP didn't probably have these issues because of the EVAs and so forth. But on HERA, was just exercising. I thought that you had a cycle machine. Right. Was that enough, or did you have extra activities planned out for the mission?
As far as exercise, we were doing exercise daily, like an ISS protocol, for mitigating effects of microgravity, for all the same reasons they do for ISS. We didn't have anything else. Maybe part of your question, that picture of me jumping in the air, within a minute we got a call from MCC saying, don't do that. You're taking safety risks that we didn't approve. So don't go jumping up and down inside the habitat. And they were really watching us. There were cameras everywhere. You'd be standing there talking with another crew member, and this camera over here would suddenly swivel and look at you right in the face. And they were doing facial recognition work. I was wearing a hat at one point because I had bed hair, I woken up, so I put a hat on in the morning, and they told me to take off the hat because the cameras couldn't recognize my face because the hat was shading part of my face. So they were monitoring all of our emotions and everything that we're doing to make sure that we were staying within, the bounds of safe protocols. I don't know if that helps your question, but yeah, we were closely controlled to make sure we were, being safe.
Hi, Bill. Thank you
Yes.
so much for this very, very interesting presentation. I was wondering a little bit, because you were talking about the exercisement. Mm-hmm. You have humidity levels going up and your CO2 levels going up. And I know you were not that much involved with the systems, but do you know anything about the processes of how they reduce the humidity levels and how they reduce the CO2 levels, especially when you were exercising?
So in HERA, they just had an open loop system. So they were bringing in fresh air from outside in the high bay. And then fans would pull in the air, and then it would be pushed out through vents that we couldn't see. So it was a constant flush of fresh air through the habitat.
So there was no overpressure, no closed loop system?
Right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, that was part of the low fidelity nature of it. It wasn't sealed environment, and there really wasn't an ecless system. There were really just fans and air filters like you find in a house. And I know I was getting itchy to do something with the systems. So in the evening, one evening I asked, I found some spare filters in the airlock. Can I change out the air filters just to have it feel like something real? And they let me do it. But that was it. But that's what I learned, that the air is just, they're pulling in fresh air from the high bay and then flushing out the air from inside the cabin. So there was no concern with CO2.
Okay, and then one last question about the HMP.
Mm-hmm.
What were the emergency protocols? Was there a doctor on standby, and how much was the evacuation time in case something happened?
So one of our crew members was designated as the first aid officer. So they had first aid training, more than the average person. They were not doctors, but they were trained at least to do enough to stabilize somebody so then a plane could come in and take you back to Resolute. That would be the plan there. So I think every mission they try to have somebody that's designated as the medical point of contact.
Okay, but there was no medical evacuation plan or procedure?
No, the what?
A medical evacuation
No,
procedure?
that was it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hey, Bill, I just came up with this random and quick question. When you participated in HERA, how far into your NASA career were you? Were you a mission controller yet? And then
Yes.
HMP, same thing, same question. And how did that experience affect you as a mission controller? I think, I don't remember how long, I think it was 10 or 20 years. I'm just curious how that affected you as a mission controller at NASA.
Yeah, by the time I did HERA, I had been a certified flight controller. Then I had gone and done life support systems development for Orion. And then was actually back on my second stint as a flight controller again after Constellation was canceled. And it was at that time that I did the HERA mission. And I thought what was great is I had spent a lot of time trying to put myself in the shoes of an astronaut. As a crew instructor and writing crew procedures, I always tried to get into that mindset of what's the crew member going to be doing, what's their concern when I'm writing a procedure, so that I can predict those things and incorporate them in the procedure. This was an opportunity to go on the other side of the fence and be the crew member following procedures and thinking about what are my concerns and worries at that point from the crew member. And on the crew member side, I'm worried about getting this darn timeline done. And there's a procedure, it has a goal, and I want to get to that goal, and so that I can move on to the next thing. And if I can do it faster, that means I have time to go get a snack or go to the bathroom. So it's a different priority set when you're on the other side of the fence and when you're the person writing the procedures. So that helped me when I come back to being a flight controller and writing procedures. It helped me understand, what they're going through. So I could see both points of view now. So it was helpful in my career at that point. When I did HMP, I was at Sierra Space developing inflatable habitats. And so at that point, I was really interested in the habitat design effort. And I learned a lot from the architecture at HMP, but as far as representing a true habitat and analyzing it from a habitat design, saying, okay, if you really wanted to put this habitat on the moon or on Mars, how well does that work? The returns were limited because it wasn't very high fidelity. It wasn't really designed to be that way. There's a long history that I can talk about between HMP and FMARS on those two habitats that are nearby. There's a geological feature in between the two for a reason, but there was an original intent behind that, and that intent is part of why that habitat isn't high fidelity. It wasn't meant to be a habitat in a nutshell in the beginning. So I think that was part of my feedback on that one. So when I did MDRS, high seas, the others, I do the same thing, trying to visualize, okay, they've built this habitat. If I took this habitat, put it on Mars or the moon, how well does that work? And so I'm looking at fidelity and actually the architecture and use of space, traffic flow, those kinds of things, to then extract that information and apply it to my work today. I don't know, I probably went too far, but there you go.
Bill, it's perfect, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
Just a small comment on that. That's also something that we've observed during the Analogue missions at ÖVF, that the Analogue astronauts actually would set up their own Excel sheets, like tracking the progress in the different experiments, like having their own scoring and kind of keeping track on how far they already beat the clock in the progress, so that there's kind of this really ambition going on inside the habitat that you wouldn't even recognize at the first sight from the outside, from the mission planning or support side. But there's actually a very highly ambitious crew, and you kind of have to actually kind of support or actually slow them down because they really want to go ahead with, like, what else can we do now? We have time. Like, guys, take a break. Yeah.
Yeah.